Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Crime, where we talk about true crime, and for this month only, horror. Last week, we had a guest come on while I discussed the true crime that inspired the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. If you hadn't heard it yet, go check it out because it was a fun time. This week, I'm covering the 1976 film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which is loosely based off of a string of murders in Texarkana, Texas. These crimes were never solved, so I won't be focusing on a specific killer, rather the suspects, the crimes themselves, and how they're similar to those in the movie. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, curl up on the couch, and get ready for some true crime. The crimes were known as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, a string of murders that took place from February to May 1946, and happened within and around the town of Texarkana, Texas. No one knows who the killer was because they were never apprehended. All that's known about this killer are the descriptions from the few survivors of his crimes. The Phantom Killer, as he would later be known, did not kill his first two victims, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Leary. Around midnight on February 22nd, 1946, the couple were parked on a secluded road known to be a lover's lane. If you don't know what that means, it's a hookup spot for couples. Anyway, as they were parked there, a man wearing a white sack-like covering on his face, like the Jason mask from the second Friday the 13th movie, if you're familiar with it, came up to the car. The man shined a flashlight through the window, and Hollis politely asked him to leave. The man replied, "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say." The man ordered the couple out of the car, made Hollis remove his pants, and struck him in the head with a pistol. Leary would later report the noise of Hollis getting hit was so loud she initially thought he was shot, but it was actually his skull fracturing from the impact. Leary was taunted by the man, who told her to try and run away. She did, but he caught up to her and asked her why she was running, and then sexually assaulted her with the barrel of his gun. After the assault, Leary was able to escape to a house and get someone to call the police. Meanwhile, Hollis awoke from his unconscious state and flagged down a car to help him. When the police arrived some 30 minutes later, the assailant was gone. What didn't help this case was that both victims gave conflicting statements as to what they could remember about the assailant. Leary claimed that she had seen through the eye holes of the mask that the man was black, but Hollis thought he was white. He later recanted his statement because he was blinded with the flashlight and couldn't see the man well enough. It makes sense to me that Leary gave a more accurate description because she, unfortunately, spent more time with him up close. Though they had conflicting statements, they agreed he was about 6 feet tall. Unfortunately, because of their conflicting statements, the police actually made the honestly dumbest decision I've ever read in my research of true crime, and believed Hollis and Leary were lying. Police thought they knew the attacker and were covering for him. "Yes, Mr. Policeman, I was assaulted by a man with a gun up my lady parts, and I want to protect his identity." Excuse me, what the fuck? The second couple was not as fortunate as the first. When on March 24th, 1946, Richard Griffin and his girlfriend Polly Ann Moore were found dead in Griffin's car at another lover's lane. They were both shot, Griffin twice, one of them in the head, and Moore shot in the head. There was evidence that they were both shot outside and then placed back inside of the car. The police finally decided to go full force on this, and the FBI was called in. However, even with the FBI and a cash reward, they still weren't coming up with anything useful. Cash rewards don't always give the best information, in my opinion, because of the incentive of money more people will try and get involved, and the information they give isn't usually factual. This is true in this case because they received about 100 false leads. Even with the extra help, the killer struck again, this time on the evening of April 13th, 1946. Betty Jo Booker was picked up by her friend Paul Martin from a jam session with her band. This was the last time either of them were seen alive. The next morning, Martin's body would be found by a family lying on the side of the road. Booker's body was actually found almost 2 miles away after a search party had been issued. Martin had been shot 4 times, in the nose, the rib, the hand, and finally through the back of his neck. Overkill? Or maybe Martin was trying to buy Booker time to escape and fend the Phantom Killer off for a bit, but ultimately failed. When they found Booker's body, she was on her back, fully clothed, with a hand in her pocket. She had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head. The weapon that was used was the same gun as the previous double murder of Griffin and Moore. Investigators found Martin's car some 3 miles away from Booker's body and about 1 mile away from Martin's own body, with the keys still in it. Maybe the killer had given them the opportunity to escape, but this time he didn't let them get away. It makes me wonder if he loved the thrill of the hunt, chasing his prey before killing them. These would not be the killer's last victims, because police still could not catch them. No matter how much reward money they put out or how much media coverage this got, they still didn't have enough evidence to go by. Virgil Starks, a 37-year-old farmer, was at his farmhouse listening to a show on the radio. His wife, Katie Starks, gave him a heating pack for the sore back that he had. She had gone to bed to read, and while she was there, she heard a loud sound. It sounded like glass breaking, so she went to investigate to see if her husband had dropped anything. He'd actually been shot through the window of their farmhouse, twice in the back of his head. When she entered the room, she saw Virgil stand up and drop to the floor. When Katie realized that he was dead, she raced to the phone to call the police. She only got to the second dial on her rotary phone before being shot herself, once in the cheek and once in the jaw. Even with her severely wounded head, she attempted to retrieve the gun in her house, but she was blinded by her own blood. Katie knew if she didn't do something, she was going to die. So she ran out of the house and went to find a neighbor. She got to her neighbor Mrs. Pratter's house, and she answered the door. She said, "Virgil is dead," and proceeded to collapse on the ground. Mrs. Pratter shot her rifle in the air to summon another neighbor, Mr. Taylor. They drove Katie Starks to the hospital. After surgery, she would recover. These were the final crimes of the Phantom Killer. The police did an extensive investigation into the cases, but they never caught the man. This did not mean the case was without suspects, though. In fact, there were almost 400 of them. At first, the police and other law enforcement tried to use decoys to lure the Phantom out. Even some overly enthusiastic teenagers tried to do the same. Nothing came of this, though. During the investigations, they apprehended no one for the first, of Hollis and Leary, but for the second, that of Griffin and Moore. They had over 200, all of whom were cleared of all charges. For the case of Booker and Martin, they actually had a taxi driver who was a main suspect for a time, because his cab was seen in the vicinity of the crime that morning, but that lead fizzled out quickly. For that of the Starkses, they suspected many, but few were actually arrested, and all who were set free. They did at one point have a prime suspect, a man and his wife who were in the business of selling stolen cars. A police officer named Max Tackett realized that there was a stolen car the night of one of the murders, and not just that, there had been a stolen car previously found abandoned as well. It was suspicious that these cars were getting stolen on or around the times of the murders. Tackett decided to further investigate this lead, and he found the wife of the car thief, arresting her as she was found with a stolen car in her possession. She claimed her husband had nothing to do with the crimes and that they only sold stolen cars. In the end, nothing came of this lead, but a major point of circumstantial evidence was that the car Peggy Sweeney, the wife, was arrested with was the one reported missing on the night of the Griffin Moore murders. On the other hand, her husband, Yul Sweeney, his fingerprints did not match any from the crime scenes, and also, unknowns at the time, not to happen until decades later, in the years 1999 and 2000, an unidentified woman called the families of the victims and apologized for the actions of her father. Yul Sweeney was never known to have had any children, though to this day we don't know if those calls were real or a sick prank. Now that we have that lengthy case under us, let's take a look at the movie and find our connections. In the town of Texarkana, Texas, on March 3rd, 1946, a young couple was out for a night on a lover's lane. Sammy and Linda had no idea they would run into a mysterious man with a white sack over his face. The man pulled the wires out of the engine of Sammy's car, and while Sammy tried to start the car, the man broke the window and pulled Sammy out. Cutting him on the broken glass, he then tossed the boy to the ground and got in the car with Linda. The morning after, both Linda and Sammy were found barely alive. Linda on the side of the road, her body covered in several bites. Unlike in the real case, Linda was not sexually assaulted. After this, the sheriff is warned to tell young couples to stay off of lonely roads at night. The next set of victims would be less fortunate than the first. They find their next set of victims at the end of that month on March 24th. While on a stormy night, Deputy Norman Ramsey was investigating a lover's lane when he heard gunshots and found the bodies of Howard and Emma dead. Howard in a ditch and his girlfriend Emma tied to a tree. Ramsey spots the masked man escaping in a car. With the severity of the crimes escalating, the town called in a specialist, a Texas Ranger, Captain J.D. Morales. Morales explains he will be taking over the investigation, and he dubs the attacker as the Phantom Killer. Ramsey tells Morales that he thinks the killer might strike every 21 days. They then try to do decoys, just like in the real case when they tried to have all the decoys, but just in the same sense, nothing came of this. The killer waited until prom to strike on an unsuspecting couple. After the dance on April 14th, the trombonist who was playing, Peggy, leaves with her boyfriend Roy. In the actual crime, Booker and Martin were not dating, and no one actually knew what they were doing out there at the time of the attack, and also Booker played the saxophone and not the trombone. For Roy and Peggy, they go to Spring Lake, even though Peggy is worried about the killer. And she was right to be worried, because when they're about to leave, the Phantom Killer jumps onto the door of the car and pulls Roy out, causing Peggy to crash the car. Peggy flees as the killer beats Roy, but she does not escape. He ties her to a tree, takes her trombone, attaches a knife to the end of it, and plays the trombone. Plays the trombone, and he stabs her repeatedly in the back with the knife. It's probably one of the most brutal scenes from the film. Now, this was the killing that was based off of Booker's death. The girls were both in a band, but to make it more dramatic for the film, they changed the instrument and the cause of death. The trombone, if you've never played it, when you hold it up to make the sound, there's this slide that you have to literally slide back and forth in different ways on the trombone to make different sounds come out of the instrument, to produce different sounds. So as the killer was hitting her repeatedly with a knife that he had attached to the end of the slide of the trombone, it's a long slide. Trombones are a long, thin instrument. He was stabbing her as if it was a hand stabbing her. He was roughly sliding the trombone back and forth. For the last attacks in the film, it was partially accurate to the actual attacks that happened with the Starkses. The woman in the film, Helen, she was accurate to Katie Starks, her counterpart. She was pursued through a cornfield, though, by the Phantom Killer, which actually did not happen in the real case. So at the end of the movie, it actually alludes to that stolen car idea that they came up with in the actual case with this end scene. Morales and Ramsey receive a call about a stolen car that matches the one from the murders of Howard and Emma that Ramsey saw. Remember, the killer escaped in a vehicle that Ramsey did catch a glimpse of earlier in the film. While investigating it, they encountered the Phantom Killer. Morales tries to shoot him, but misses, and a chase ensues. So the Phantom is running away. He actually escapes them by running across train tracks before the train comes, but he gets shot in the leg in the process. This does not slow him down, though, and Morales and Ramsey have to wait because the train takes forever to cross the tracks and they can't get anywhere else. They're stuck there. They just have to wait, and they continue their search after the train has left and they cross the tracks, but nothing was ever found. Years later, in 1976, the film The Town That Dreaded Sundown premieres in Texarkana, and a man wearing the same shoes as the Phantom Killer steps into line to see it. That's where the movie ends. Very, very cool ending, honestly. I love the meta ending that they gave the film. And this was before they even really knew what meta was. Like, we talk about it all the time, like it's casual, but this was way back then. They even got the year the same as the year that the actual movie they made came out. It's really interesting. They totally broke the fourth wall by putting their own movie within their movie. And though there were differences in the killings, and surely it was to hype the drama for the film, they had to do something with some of these killings to make it more dramatic. They're really accurate to the actual crimes. The same amount of victims, the same victims live, the same victims die. It's almost completely accurate in that sense of the word. It's just the way that they were killed is different for some of them. And like I said, it's to hype up the movie and add more drama to the movie. Like, in the actual case, no police officer ever saw the killer escape in a vehicle, so they wouldn't know about the stolen car thing. There's no chase scene in the actual case. They probably would have apprehended him if there was a chase in real life, I would assume. And the train thing was just to add more drama. Like I said, none of that ever happened. And when I come back to it, it's honestly one of the best depictions of a true crime story told in a horror movie that I've seen because of how accurate they stay to the actual crimes. And I know there are other movies, like more modern movies, that people are more likely to watch, like Annabelle, for example. I know that stays pretty accurate. I'm not a huge fan of Annabelle. That stays pretty accurate to the movie, but this one is a classic, and it really stays as true to the crime as it could without making the movie, less desirable to watch. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to the accounting of these crimes and how they correlate with the events of the movie. It's honestly a really interesting story because, like I said, Phantom Killer was never caught, so people still speculate to this day who could have possibly done it. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. Until next time. This has been another amazing episode of Coffee and Crime. Next Monday, we will be covering the true crime that inspired the 2009 cult classic movie, Jennifer's Body. And it's more similar and jarring than you would actually think. So I hope to see you there. Please help me out by giving this video a like, and if you already haven't, please subscribe and hit that notification bell for more Coffee and Crime content. Exciting news also, we just got a SoundCloud, and I will be uploading episodes to SoundCloud at the end of every week, so if you want to go there to get your content so you can listen to it on your mobile phone a little bit easier, I will leave a link to the SoundCloud page in the description. Don't forget, we also have a Tumblr and a Twitter if you need to be up to date with everything Coffee and Crime. Thank you all. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you all have a great week.